The Galactic Defense Academy's induction hall hummed with the low growls and chittering of 100 different species. Towering Vorthax cadets, their chitinous armor glinting under the harsh lights, flexed claws capable of shredding steel. Sleek Zorati warriors stretched their whip-like limbs, venomous spurs retracting and extending in anticipation. Among them, Cadet Kale Vex stood out, not for any impressive trait, but for his glaring lack of them. A snort came from the line behind him. "Look at it!" rumbled a Vorthax, nudging his companion. "No armor. No claws. How does it even hold a weapon without snapping in half?" Kale kept his spine straight, his breathing even. He'd heard it all before. The assessment began with strength trials. A Zorati cadet lifted a 500-kilo weight block with effortless grace, her segmented limbs barely straining. The Vorthax that followed didn't even use his arms. He simply clamped his mandibles around the block and hoisted it overhead, incisors denting the metal. Then it was Kale's turn. Laughter rippled through the crowd as he approached the weight. "Just step aside, fleshling," a Vorthax called. "No shame in admitting weakness." Kale ignored them. He didn't grip the block like the others. Instead, he braced his legs, rolled his shoulders, and using the principles of leverage his mentor had drilled into him, shifted his entire body into the lift. The block rose, wobbled, then steadied. Not with brute strength, but with precision. Silence. The instructor's ocular implant flickered as it recorded the result. "Cadet Vex, successful lift." The next trial was speed. Zorati darted through the obstacle course like living projectiles, their elongated limbs carrying them in bounding leaps. Kale didn't sprint. He moved like water, flowing around barriers, using momentum rather than raw speed. When he finished, his time wasn't the fastest. But his energy expenditure, according to the bioscanners, was the lowest of any cadet. By the endurance run, the murmurs had changed. No longer mocking. Now they were wary. Kale ran. Not in the explosive bursts of the Zorati or the relentless stomping of the Vorthax, but in the steady, unyielding rhythm of a human, a species that had evolved to outlast its prey. Sweat slicked his skin, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. When the final buzzer sounded, he was still moving. The instructor's voice cut through the murmurs. "Preliminary assessments concluded. Tomorrow, the gauntlet." A Vorthax cadet, the largest of them, shouldered past Kale. "Luck won't save you in real combat, human." Kale met his gaze. "Neither will arrogance." The room tensed. No one had ever spoken back to Drow the Unbroken. Tomorrow would be interesting. The gauntlet wasn't just a test, it was a spectacle. The Academy's combat arena stretched out beneath a domed observation deck, packed with cadets and instructors alike. Holographic projectors flickered to life, outlining the course, a brutal, multi-stage trial designed to push warriors to their absolute limits. Kale stepped forward, acutely aware of the stares. The Vorthax sneered, their armored hides glinting under the artificial suns. The Zorati watched with narrowed, calculating eyes. None of them believed he belonged here. The first stage was strength. Not the controlled lift of weights, but raw, unfiltered power. A mechanized combat drone, thick-plated, hydraulic limbs whirring, lumbered into position. The objective was simple: disable it. Drow went first. The massive Vorthax charged, his natural armor deflecting the drone's strikes as he wrenched its arm clean off in a shower of sparks. The crowd roared. Kale's turn. The drone lunged, servos hissing. Instead of meeting it head-on, Kale sidestepped, letting momentum carry the machine past him. His fingers found the weak point, an exposed joint at the elbow. A precise strike, a twist, and the arm went limp. The drone recalibrated, swinging its remaining limb in a wide arc. Kale ducked, rolled, and drove his knee into its primary sensor array. A shower of sparks. The drone collapsed. Silence. Then murmurs. The second stage was speed. Not a race, but survival. The arena floor shifted, revealing a grid of pressure plates. Some triggered stun blasts, others dropped cadets into nets below. The Zorati navigated it with inhuman reflexes, their lithe bodies weaving through the danger. Kale didn't try to match their agility. He moved deliberately, reading the plates before committing. When a blast erupted to his left, he didn't flinch. He used the concussive force to propel himself forward, rolling into the next safe zone. The instructors exchanged glances. The final stage was endurance. The arena darkened. The temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the floor as the environmental controls simulated a frozen battlefield. Cadets were pitted against waves of drones, their systems lagging in the cold. One by one, the others fell. The Vorthax, despite their strength, slowed to a crawl as their joints locked up. The Zorati's venom glands froze solid, leaving them defenseless. Kale fought on. His breath came in ragged clouds, his muscles burned, but he didn't stop. Human physiology, built for endurance, for stubborn survival, kept him moving. When the last drone sparked out at his feet, the arena lights flared back to life. The scoreboard flickered. Kale's name sat at the top. Not just above the other cadets. Above every record in the last 50 cycles. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in disbelieving shouts. Dral shoved his way to the front, his mandibles twitching. "This is a malfunction," he snarled. The chief instructor's voice cut through the chaos. "The system doesn't malfunction." Dral turned on Kale, his massive frame looming. "Then he cheated." Kale met his gaze. "Prove it." The arena fell silent. Dral's claws flexed. "I challenge you. Here. Now." A beat. Then the chief instructor nodded. "Very well." The crowd surged back, forming a ring. Kale exhaled. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a reckoning. The arena's energy barriers hummed to life, sealing the combatants inside. Dral the Unbroken needed no weapons. His natural armor was thicker than most battle plating, his claws sharper than monofilament blades. He'd never lost a duel. Not once. Kale had no armor. No claws. Just his own flesh, his training, and the cold certainty that underestimating a human was the last mistake many warriors ever made. Dral struck first, a thunderous lunge meant to end the fight in a single blow. Kale didn't block. He pivoted, letting the strike graze past him, and drove 2 fingers into the nerve cluster beneath Dral's armored shoulder. The Vorthax roared, more from surprise than pain. The crowd's murmurs turned to shouts. Round 2. Dral swung again, this time with a backhand meant to crush bone. Kale dropped low, swept Dral's leading leg, and used the alien's own momentum to send him crashing into the barrier. The impact rattled the entire arena. Dral surged up, mandibles flaring. "Stand and fight, coward!" Kale exhaled through his nose. Systema wasn't about brute force, it was about efficiency. Every movement calculated. Every breath controlled. Dral charged. This time, Kale met him head-on. Not with strength. With timing. At the last possible instant, he twisted, seized Dral's wrist, and redirected the force straight into the ground. The Vorthax's fist cratered the alloy floor. Before he could recover, Kale's elbow snapped into his throat, not hard enough to crush cartilage, just enough to stagger him. A knee to the ribs. A palm strike to the diaphragm. Dral wheezed, his armored plating useless against attacks targeting what lay beneath. The crowd had gone deathly silent. Dral swung wildly, desperation creeping into his movements. Kale flowed around each strike, countering with precise, economical blows, wrist locks, joint strikes, pressure points no alien anatomy had ever needed to defend against. Then, the opening. Dral overextended. Kale hooked his arm, twisted his hips, and flipped the massive warrior onto his back with a force that shook the arena. Before Dral could rise, Kale's foot pressed against his throat, not crushing, just present. A silent declaration. Yield. Dral's claws twitched. His mandibles flexed. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then, unthinkably, the Vorthax champion tapped the floor twice. Submission. The energy barriers dropped. The silence shattered into chaos. Kale stepped back, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. He didn't gloat. didn't smirk. Just offered Drow a hand up. The Vorthax stared at it like it was a live grenade. Slowly, grudgingly, he took it. The chief instructor's voice cut through the noise. Cadet Vex. The Admiral wants to see you. Immediately. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the victory. Just cold urgency. Cale wiped his palms on his fatigues. Whatever came next wouldn't be as simple as a fight. Admiral Verex's office was all sharp angles and cold metal, the kind of place that made visitors feel like specimens under glass. The holographic insignia of the Galactic Defense Fleet pulsed above her desk, casting jagged shadows across her scarred exoskeleton. She didn't offer Cale a seat. Your combat scores, she said, flicking a data slate toward him, are statistically impossible. Cale didn't reach for it. You saw the footage. I saw a human do what no Vorthax, Zorati, or even cyber-augmented mercenary has ever managed. Her antennae twitched. Do you understand how dangerous that makes you? Outside the viewport, stars burned cold and distant. Cale kept his voice level. I didn't cheat. Verex's laugh was a dry rasp. No. That's the problem. She tapped the slate, pulling up classified files, research on human physiology, red-stamped with warnings. Your species shouldn't be this adaptable. Your pain tolerance, your nervous system's reaction speeds, it defies every evolutionary model we have. Cale said nothing. You've started a war, Verex continued. Not with weapons. With an idea. She leaned forward. 3 factions are already demanding humans be barred from the Academy. 2 others want your kind fast-tracked into special forces. And 1, she tapped the slate again, revealing a black market bounty listing, has put a price on your genome. Cale's fingers twitched. He'd expected pride. Maybe even a commendation. Not this. Verex stood. You have 2 choices. Leave now, and we'll erase your records. No one will remember your name. And the second option? Stay. Her compound eyes gleamed. Prove humanity belongs here. Become the first human instructor. Train the next generation to fight like you do. The weight of it settled over him. Not just a cadet anymore. A symbol. Cale looked past her, to the Academy's sprawling grounds below. To the cadets who'd mocked him, now watching with something like awe. He made his decision. 3 cycles later, the Galactic Defense Academy revised its combat manuals. Human adaptability was now a core discipline. Cadets from a dozen species trained in blended techniques. Vorthax strength tempered with human leverage, Zorati speed balanced with human endurance. And in the center of it all, Instructor Vex watched his students spar, his face unreadable. No one laughed at humans anymore. No one dared.